Headline edition, July 8, 1947. The Army Air Forces has announced that a flying disc has been found and is now in the possession of the Army. Army officers say the missile found...
On July 19, 1972, a 20-man search party was organized in the small town of Louisiana, Missouri, to track down a huge, black, hairy beast that was being reported by local residents. Louisiana's police chief Shelby Ward was afraid that nervous residents would start shooting the monster and hit a local by mistake. The media whipped up the frenzy about the monster, and the quiet, unassuming community was launched into the national spotlight. The press humorously dubbed the reportedly foul-smelling creature Momo, which stood for the Missouri Monster. But local residents found the frightening encounters anything but funny. The Missouri Monster Scare actually began on July 11, 1972. The first encounter with the creature occurred on the outskirts of Louisiana, at the base of Marzoff Hill. An 8-year-old boy named Terry Harrison and his brother Wiley, age 5, were playing with their dog in the woods at the edge of their yard. Suddenly, an older sister, Doris, 15, who was inside of the house, heard them screaming. She ran to look out of the bathroom window and saw something standing by a tree. It was 6 or 7 feet tall, black and hairy, she said. It stood like a man, but it didn't look like one to me. She began crying and ran into the other room to call her mother on the telephone. Both Doris and Terry got a good look at the monster and agreed that its face could not be seen because of the mass of hair that covered its body. The creature seemed to have no neck, and it was flecked with blood, likely from the dead dog that it was carrying under its arm. The smell of the creature was said to have been horrendous, and it may have been this odor that made the Harrison's dog violently sick a short time after the incident. The dog's eyes grew red, and it vomited for hours afterward. At 4 p.m., Edgar Harrison, the children's father, and a deacon in the local Pentecostal church returned home from his job at the town waterworks. He found no monster, but he did find that the brush was beaten down where the children said that the creature had been standing. He also found a few faint footprints in the dust and a few black hairs scattered about. That same afternoon, a woman who lived about 3 blocks away from the Harrisons, Mrs. Clarence Lee, reported that she heard animal sounds outside her home. Not long afterwards, she allegedly spoke with a local farmer whose dog had disappeared. Remembering the Harrisons' children's report, she wondered if the monster had taken it. On July 14th, Edgar Harrison was conducting a regular prayer meeting in his home, and soon after it ended, heard clanging sounds like someone was throwing rocks into the metal water reservoir on the top of Marzoff Hill. The reservoir was an attraction for neighborhood children, but it was unlikely that any of them would have been playing there at that hour. As he listened closely to the sounds, he heard one especially loud ring and then an animal-like growl. The sound came closer and closer and was so loud that his family came running out of the house. They urged him to leave the neighborhood, but Harrison wanted to see what was making the sound. Finally, he agreed to leave, and as he drove down Allen Street, he met about 40 people, some of them carrying guns, who were on their way to investigate the sounds at the reservoir. For some reason, Harrison shouted, "Here it comes!" and the entire crowd turned away and ran. A number of people reported hearing the strange cries and screams that night, but by the time the police officers Jerry Floyd and John Whitaker arrived on the scene to investigate, they found nothing out of the ordinary. The creature continued to be seen in the days that followed, leading to Chief Ward's, quote, monster hunt on July 19th. The posse included Edgar Harrison and State Conservation Officer Gus Artis, and they covered Marzoff Hill and the surrounding area using two-way radios, but found nothing. While it was taking place, residents reported animal sounds in other parts of town. On July 20th, more investigators joined the search and again combed the area behind the Harrison house and all along Marzoff Hill. They found trampled brush, signs of digging, and large tracks that were more than 10 inches long. Handprints were found pressed into the dry, hard soil, which investigators were convinced it would have taken immense pressure to make. They also smelled the beast, believing that it was close, but saw nothing. On July 21st, the monster was seen again, this time on the Great River Road, which runs along the Mississippi River. Ellis Minor, who lived on the road, was sitting in front of his home late in the evening. It was very dark, and suddenly his bird dog began to growl. Minor switched on a powerful flashlight that he used for hunting, and he spotted the monster about 20 feet away from him, standing in the middle of the road. He later told reporters that it had hair as black as coal, and that he could not see its face because the hair on its head hung down to its chest. As soon as I threw the light on it, he recalled, it whirled and took off that way. He did not report the sighting to the police, but he did call Gus Artis, the local conservation officer. By now, national publicity was turning Louisiana into a three-ring circus. People were driving in from surrounding states, hoping to get a look at the creature. Edgar Harrison had become obsessed with finding a solution to the monster mystery. His family refused to come home again, taking up residence in a restaurant the family owned, and so his house was turned into a monster outpost. The phones rang constantly. Meanwhile, Harrison had taken a leave of absence from his job at the waterworks to hunt the monster full time. In the company of friends and investigators, he camped out at the foot of Marzoff Hill for 21 straight nights. And while he never saw the monster, he did hear and smell it, and noted that whenever the searchers were onto something, they were overwhelmed by the terrible smell. During the last week of July and into the early days of August, more prints were found south of town. More tracks were discovered on the early morning of August 3rd at the farm of Mr. and Mrs. Bill Sutterth, who lived just northwest of town. In the middle of the night, they heard high-pitched howling in their yard and ran outside with flashlights to see what was going on. In the middle of their garden, they found 4 large prints. Sutterth quickly called his hunting buddy, Clyde Penrod, who drove over and made a plaster cast of the print. Penrod, who was an avid outdoorsman, was puzzled by the whole affair. With the tracks being 20 feet away from anything else, he couldn't understand how they could have been made. They began abruptly in the center of the garden and ended just as mysteriously. It looked as if the creature had just appeared in the center of the garden and then vanished. No tracks were found anywhere else on the property, and there was no sign that any prankster could have made them either. This was to be the last encounter with the creature, and perhaps it is fitting that the monster flap ended on such an inexplicable note. The discovery of the strange tracks at the Sutterth farm ended the Momo sightings and encounters in Louisiana, and the story has become little more than a remembered curiosity in the area today. There are some, though, who are likely to never forget the summer of 1972. For those people, and for those with an interest in the unexplained, those days in July will always remain a mystery. Thank you for listening to the Shadowland radio show. If you're listening on the Blackwater Media YouTube channel, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. You can also listen at blackwatermedia.net and the Blackwater Media Facebook page. I'm Dr. William Lester, and I promise to see each and every one of you again on the flip side.